I used to think that love meant becoming who they wanted me to be. For 28 years, I tried to twist and polish myself into the perfect daughter, the kind of child who got standing ovations at graduation ceremonies, not stony silences at family dinners. But the truth, I was never the pride of the Elwood family. Not when I was born, not when I chose the path no one expected, and definitely not when I stood at the edge of the White House lawn about to receive one of the highest honors in the nation. Even then, they looked at me like I was a stranger. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where it all began, our house on Hazel Street in Cambridge, Massachusetts. A white colonial with black shutters, hydrangeas in the front, and an overwhelming scent of success baked into every brick. My father, Dr. Charles Elwood, was a tenured professor at Harvard Chair of the Political Economy Department. My mother, Dr. Eleanor Elwood, made headlines for her pioneering work in gene editing. My older brother, Jonathan, was a legal prodigy on track to become the youngest partner in his firm's history. Then there was me, Sarah Elwood, track athlete, solid B+ student, quiet, observant, different. From the moment I could walk, I was told that my destiny was a lab coat or a law degree. Every birthday came with new textbooks. Every summer was booked with science camps. They'd invite their colleagues over, proudly introducing Jonathan like he was royalty, then gesture toward me and say, "Sarah's still figuring things out." But I knew who I was. I just didn't know how to say it out loud yet. The only person who ever looked at me like I already mattered was my grandfather, my dad's dad. He'd fought in Korea as a combat medic before becoming a hospital director. He never talked much at dinner, always letting my father hold court. But when he and I were alone, he told different kinds of stories. Messy stories. Real ones. I wasn't saving the world from a whiteboard kid, he once whispered, kneeling beside me in the garage, where he kept his old medals. I was saving it one soldier at a time, in the dirt under fire. I must have been 9 the first time he let me hold his medic badge. It was small, battered, and the most beautiful thing I'd ever touched. That day, he showed me the bloodstains on the canvas pouch he used to carry morphine. He said this badge didn't come from grades or titles. It came from grit. I never forgot that. But grit wasn't a language my family spoke. In high school, I did okay. Not great. My GPA hovered just below Ivy League territory, which in my house was treated like a death sentence. My SAT score, 1230, was met with stone-cold silence. I'll never forget the way my mom looked at me that day. "Your brother scored 1590, she said. "He got into Yale, MIT, and Stanford." "I know," I muttered. "You mention it often." My guidance counselor was kind. She told me I had leadership skills and a compassionate heart. She suggested programs in nursing or public health at state universities. When I told my parents, my father exhaled like I had just personally offended him. "State school," he said. "Well, maybe you can transfer." So I applied. Not to Harvard, not to Yale. Just places where maybe I'd feel like I could breathe. The rejection letters from their dream schools came one after another. I was waitlisted at 2, accepted at 3. My parents said nothing. They just placed the letters on the kitchen counter like they were eviction notices. I remember the night everything changed. A recruiter had come to our high school. Most of the kids ignored her, but I stayed behind after the presentation. Her name was Sergeant Evelyn Carter. She wasn't loud or pushy. She didn't wave flags or talk about glory. She looked me in the eyes and said, "Some people find purpose in labs or courtrooms. Others find it where it hurts. You strike me as someone who runs toward the pain, not away from it." That night, I searched everything I could about military medical training. I read about medics in Iraq and Afghanistan, people who had saved lives with tourniquets and trauma gauze. It sounded terrifying. It also felt more honest than anything I'd ever known. I spent the next 2 weeks in silence thinking. Then I walked into the kitchen with my enlistment papers. "I'm joining the army," I said. My father was mid-sip on his Bordeaux. He choked so hard wine came out his nose. My mother stared at me like I'd said I was joining a cult. "The military," she said, her voice barely a whisper. My brother predictably laughed. "This isn't a movie, Sarah. You think you're going to be some kind of battlefield angel. Come on." I didn't respond. I just slid the papers across the table, already signed. My dad's voice dropped to a growl. The army is for people who don't have options. Is that who you are now? Someone with no future? I wanted to say so many things, but I only said one. No, I'm someone who's finally choosing her own. That night, I sat on my bed looking at two things: my college acceptance letter and the army contract. One of them felt like a cage. The other felt terrifying but honest. 2 weeks later, I boarded the bus to basic training. No applause, no packed suitcase of encouragement, just a plain duffel bag, a silent ride, and the weight of every expectation I was leaving behind. But as the city disappeared behind me, something inside me cracked open. For the first time in my life, I was scared for the right reasons. And that's where the real story begins. Basic training wasn't the hardest thing I'd ever done, but it was the first thing I ever did, without trying to impress anyone. There was no applause, no GPA to boost, no gold stars to earn, just sweat pain and the unspoken challenge of showing up again tomorrow. The first morning at Fort Jackson, I stood in formation before sunrise, trembling in boots I didn't know how to lace correctly. The drill sergeants barked commands like thunder. I was exhausted by noon and humiliated by dusk. I failed my first push-up test, fell behind during a ruck march, and threw up twice during PT, but no one rolled their eyes at me. No one told me I was wasting my potential. They just shouted, "Do it again." And I did. Every day I got up and did it again. There was something strangely freeing about it. For the first time, no one cared who my parents were. No one asked about SAT scores or which private school I'd come from. In fact, no one asked anything. What mattered here was your grit, your effort, whether you could carry your own pack and someone else's if needed. 2 weeks in, I passed the PT test. Barely. But I passed. By week 6, I was outrunning the same recruits who'd smirked when I showed up with trembling hands. I stopped crying in the shower. I started fixing my posture not to look proud, but because I felt it in my bones. My hands grew calloused, my voice firmer. I began trusting my body instead of punishing it for not being something else. When I graduated from basic, it was raining. Most of the other soldiers had family in the stands, parents waving partners, crying kids holding signs. I stood alone, soaked to the skin in my uniform, staring at an empty patch of bleachers. No one from my family had come, not even a text. That night, I folded my graduation certificate carefully into the back of my locker. I stared at it for a long time, not because I needed it to mean something to them, but because it finally meant something to me. Next came Advanced Individual Training AIT for combat medics. That's where the real shift happened. I wasn't just learning how to shoot or ruck. I was learning how to stop bleeding with nothing but pressure and hope, how to insert IVs in the dark, how to keep a collapsed lung from killing someone when you're under enemy fire. Our instructors didn't sugarcoat anything. "You don't get a second chance on the battlefield," one of them said on the first day. "You either save the life or you don't. There's no curve. There's no extra credit. Just time and blood." I took notes like my life depended on it, because one day someone else's would. I wasn't the smartest in the class, but I was one of the most focused. I practiced every procedure until I could do it with my eyes closed. My fingers learned the texture of gauze, the feel of finding a vein, the rhythm of CPR compressions under stress. Sergeant Harper, one of the most respected instructors on base, pulled me aside one afternoon after a particularly intense trauma simulation. I thought I'd messed up. My adrenaline was still spiking. Instead, he said, "You've got the hands for this, but more importantly, you've got the heart. That's rarer than you think." It was the first time someone in authority had said I was good at something that didn't involve books or grades. I wanted to tell my parents. I wanted to share the good news. So I called home. My mother picked up after the third ring. I told her I'd just finished an intense portion of my medic training and that I'd received high praise from a senior sergeant. I waited for something. She said, "That's nice, honey. Jonathan just passed the bar. He's thinking of applying for clerkships with the Supreme Court." I held the phone in silence. I stared at the wall in my barracks, as the pride I'd felt just minutes earlier evaporated into nothingness. Then she added, "Are you eating enough? You sound thin." Thin. That was the takeaway. I didn't bother mentioning that I could now perform emergency trauma surgery in less than ideal conditions, that I could keep someone alive with 2 fingers and a bottle of saline. Instead, I changed the subject. By the end of AIT, I graduated with honors. My uniform bore its first few ribbons. My salute was sharp, my voice confident. But when I mailed home a photo from graduation, me standing with my classmates smiling in fatigues, no one responded. No text, no call, nothing. Later, I found the envelope unopened, buried in a stack of holiday cards during my next visit home. That's when I stopped trying to be seen by them. I realized they weren't just ignoring my path, they didn't even care enough to understand it. I would have to find that validation somewhere else. Maybe in the field, maybe in my team, or maybe just within myself, because something was changing inside me, and it had nothing to do with medals or uniforms. It had to do with knowing deep down that I was exactly where I was meant to be. The next assignment was waiting. Deployment orders. Afghanistan. And I hadn't even told them yet. I didn't expect a parade when I told them about my deployment. But I didn't expect silence either. "Afghanistan," I said over speakerphone. I was sitting in my barracks room, duffel packed and boots polished. "I leave in 2 weeks. There was a pause, a long one. Then my mother spoke. "Well, I suppose that was inevitable considering your career choice." My father's voice followed low and clipped. "Just keep your head down. No heroics. That was it. No be safe. No we're proud of you. Not even a let us know where to send letters." When I hung up, I stared at my reflection in the tiny mirror above my cot. My hair was tied tight, my uniform clean. I looked like a soldier. I felt like one. But in that moment, I also felt like an orphan. They had let me go so quietly, it almost seemed like they wanted to forget I existed. Deployment was a different kind of reality. The air in Afghanistan was dry, the heat brutal, and the nights colder than anyone prepared you for. Dust clung to everything, your skin, your boots, your memories. Days blurred into nights and time lost meaning. But strangely, I felt more at home there than I ever had in my parents' pristine colonial house. My squad became my family. We shared water bottles like siblings, took turns writing home for the ones who couldn't, celebrated birthdays with MRE cakes and songs off-key. We joked about everything, because if you didn't laugh, you might shatter. Sergeant Lisa Jackson, our team leader, was the kind of woman you respected instantly. Tough but fair. She didn't care where you came from, only how you showed up. "You've got good instincts, Elwood," she told me during our first field trauma rotation. "Trust them. And trust your gut. It'll save more lives than textbooks ever will." I nodded, trying not to let the pride show too much. It felt dangerous to hope. About 3 months in, we were running a routine convoy resupply mission through a narrow mountain pass. Nothing about it felt unusual. Clear skies. Radios quiet. My job was to ride in the second Humvee and be ready if something went wrong. Something did. The blast flipped the lead vehicle like it weighed nothing. Smoke, screams, shouting in 3 directions. My heart leapt into my throat, but my training kicked in like muscle memory. I was moving before I realized it. I ran toward the burning wreck, my aid bag thumping against my back, enemy fire crackling in the air like popcorn. Inside, I found Staff Sergeant Ramirez, bleeding out from his leg femoral artery, pulsing red. "Stay with me," I yelled, clamping my hand to the wound. He nodded, teeth-clenched eyes full of fear. I applied a tourniquet, injected morphine, started an IV, and signaled for the medevac. It took 14 minutes for that bird to arrive. 14 minutes of holding a man's life in my hands, my knees soaked in blood and gravel rounds zipping past my helmet. When it was over, when Ramirez was safe aboard the chopper, I collapsed behind the Humvee, my hands still trembling. Captain Davis, who'd just arrived with reinforcements, crouched beside me. "You've got ice in your veins, Elwood," he said. "You saved him. That man was gone without you." I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded and stared at the darkening sky. Back at base, I wrote home. I told them about Ramirez, that I had earned my first Army Commendation Medal, that I was proud of the work I was doing. My mother responded 3 days later with a text that said, "That's nice. Did you hear Jonathan made junior partner? That was it. No mention of the medal, no curiosity, no pride. It was the first time I deleted a message without replying. As the months passed, I kept doing the work. Fevers, gunshot wounds, infections, PTSD. I saw it all. Some days I treated 5 people. Other days I just sat beside someone and held their hand while they cried. I was promoted to sergeant ahead of schedule. I was becoming the person I'd always wanted to be, someone who mattered when things got hard, someone who didn't need a nameplate to know her worth. But when my brother graduated from law school, my parents flew me home for a surprise party. I didn't want to go, but part of me still hoped they might, I don't know, see me. I arrived in my dress uniform. Freshly cleaned, my medal shined. I'd taken the time to press every crease perfectly. The moment I walked into the party, I felt it, that old familiar weight of invisibility. People crowded around Jonathan singing praises. Aunt Linda gushed about his internship with a federal judge. A second cousin cornered me and said, "Oh, you're in the army, right? Are you allowed to carry a gun at these things?" I smiled politely, excused myself, found a corner to hide in. When my uncle approached and asked about my service, my father interrupted before I could speak. "She's doing fine," he said quickly, "but today's really about Jonathan." Later that night, my mother asked about the ribbons on my uniform. "What are those for?" she asked, like they were costume jewelry. I told her. She nodded vaguely, then said, "Have you seen your cousin Lily's med school acceptance letter?" Now that's something. I flew back to base the next day without saying goodbye. But that was the moment it clicked. They weren't just uninterested, they were incapable. They couldn't see me because I didn't fit into the frame they'd built. To them, a daughter only had value if she followed their map. And I'd burned mine a long time ago. My second deployment was coming, this time to a region known for heavy activity, the kind of place where things could go very wrong very fast. Before we shipped out, I made one last call home. I don't know what I was hoping for. A sliver of humanity, maybe. A sign they might be thinking about me. "We're about to deploy again," I said, voice careful. A particularly volatile area this time. "Just wanted to hear a familiar voice before I go." There was a pause. Then my father said, "Try not to play hero over there." And my mother added, "Oh, and your brother's engagement party is next month. We'll send pictures." I hung up. I was done begging for warmth from a cold house. That night I wrote a letter to myself, to be opened if I didn't make it back. "You chose this life for a reason," I wrote. "Whatever happens, remember your worth isn't measured by their understanding. It never was." 6 months into my second deployment, something unexpected happened. I was pulled from my unit and assigned to a Special Operations Medical Support Team. No explanation, just a name, Lieutenant Colonel James DeWitt, and a folded order packet marked "Confidential." When I arrived at the new base, they didn't waste time with introductions. "This isn't standard field medicine," DeWitt told me, in a plain concrete room that smelled like scorched coffee and sweat. "You'll be working with elite teams, low numbers, high risk, zero margin for error. You were recommended based on performance. Let's see if you can hold." I wanted to ask who had recommended me, but I didn't. The answer didn't matter. I had been seen and chosen. The selection process was unlike anything I'd experienced. I was pushed to physical extremes hikes with full gear, under punishing heat medical drills, with no sleep tactical scenarios in pitch blackness, and psychological evaluations that tried to peel my mind apart. I passed every stage. Barely, but I passed. And when the list was posted, my name was there. One of the only medics. The only woman. Sarah Elwood. We trained relentlessly, practicing emergency surgeries, in moving vehicles, conducting simulated raids while wearing gas masks, learning how to communicate silently, stitch quickly, think tactically. I slept maybe 4 hours a night. My hands were always shaking, but never during an operation. There was no room for arrogance in our unit. These weren't movie stars or adrenaline junkies. They were professionals. Quiet, precise, deadly, and deeply loyal. I had never been around people who trusted each other this much. I didn't have to prove my worth with words. I proved it with every stitch, every needle, every calm breath during chaos. They saw me not as a disappointment or the daughter who ran away. They saw me as essential. That was enough. On April 2nd, we received intelligence, 3 American aid workers had been kidnapped and were being held in a compound deep in the mountains. Intel suggested they'd be moved or executed within 48 hours. A 12-person team was assembled. I was the only medic. The mission was codenamed Silent Retrieval. Briefing was tense. Satellite images showed a heavily fortified area, surrounded by natural rock barriers and limited access points. Enemy fighters were embedded throughout. "You'll remain with the helo during breach," Captain Aaron Davis, our team lead, said. "Once the hostages are located, you'll move in, assess injuries, and stabilize for extraction." I nodded. This was what I trained for. "These hostages may be malnourished, dehydrated, possibly tortured," I added during our medical review. "Expect organ stress, compound injuries, and potential infection. Prioritize transport stabilization." We lifted off just after midnight in 2 Black Hawks. The moon was hidden behind thick cloud cover. Our team was quiet, each member focused on the task ahead. 20 minutes from target, it happened. The first bird took direct ground fire. A missile clipped the tail rotor. Warning lights flashed, alarms screamed, then impact. The helicopter spiraled and slammed into the valley floor, with a sound like thunder being torn in half. Our bird veered hard, narrowly avoiding the same fate. We circled once, then set down as close as possible, but still 3 miles from the crash. I remember the silence after the explosion, the eerie quiet that follows chaos before adrenaline rushes in. Smoke, fire, screams. Captain Davis barked orders. "Team 1 with me. Elwood assess wounded. Fast." I sprinted toward the downed bird, my bag bouncing on my back rifle tight across my chest. The wreckage glowed orange in the darkness. Inside, I found Major Reynolds slumped over the controls, blood soaking her flight suit. "Airways compromised," I muttered, assessing fast. "Head trauma, possible spinal." I applied a C-collar, started an IV, and called for a litter. The co-pilot, Lieutenant Wilson, had a shattered arm and deep lacerations across his chest. I used a pressure dressing and injected morphine as bullets cracked overhead. "We need to move," Davis shouted. "Second bird can't land under this fire." "They're circling until we clear a zone." I nodded and helped drag the injured to cover behind a rocky ledge. We weren't alone for long. Within 10 minutes, we were surrounded by an estimated 30 hostiles. The firefight was immediate, brutal, and without pause. I toggled between roles, rifle in hand when needed, medic when called. When Specialist Rivera was shot through the thigh, I crawled through open fire to reach him. "Pressure here," I instructed, guiding his trembling hands. "Don't let go." I tied a tourniquet, checked for femoral damage, and reassured him through gritted teeth. Then Master Sergeant Blake took a round to the chest. I could hear the sucking sound even before I reached him. Collapsed lung. I performed an emergency needle decompression with a pen light clenched between my teeth and my hands slick with blood. He gasped, blinked, stayed with me. "You're not dying tonight," I whispered. A round hit the rock beside my face, spraying dust in my eyes. I blinked through it, kept going. We held our position for 4 hours. Ammo ran low. Water ran out. My hands were shaking not from fear, but from overuse. I had stabilized 3 soldiers. I had 4 more bleeding, and no air support in sight. Then Captain Davis shouted, "Mitchell, we need coordinates for a strike. You're the only one with visual on their command post." I crawled to the edge of our perimeter. Bullets zipped by like hornets. One grazed my helmet. I didn't stop. I relayed the coordinates, confirmed twice. 10 minutes later, the night exploded with the roar of fighter jets. A thunderous boom rocked the earth. Half the enemy fire vanished in a single airburst. We had a chance now. But the victory was short-lived. An hour later, enemy reinforcements arrived from the north. We were flanked. A grenade exploded 10 feet from me. Shrapnel tore into my left leg. I fell hard. But I kept going. Sergeant Kyle Bennett was hit in the same blast. He was bleeding out, lungs collapsing. I dragged him behind, cover teeth clenched against the pain in my own leg. Applied a chest seal. Started fluids. Monitored his vitals. "Stay with me, Bennett," I whispered. "Your kids are waiting for you." By noon, we were outnumbered, outgunned, and surrounded. Captain Davis made the call. "Elwood, you take the worst wounded east. Evac team will meet you at the ridge. We'll hold the flank." I nodded, organized a quick litter team, and tied my thigh tight to slow the bleeding. Then I led our group 4 injured soldiers and 2 others through the jagged rocks, limping, bleeding, but focused. We walked for hours, hid in shadows, evaded patrols. 48 hours after the crash, I saw the helicopter on the horizon. We made it. I collapsed as the rotors blew sand across my face. I didn't know it then, but what I'd done during those hours, what I recorded, treated, reported, would change everything. Even if I wasn't allowed to speak of it, even if no one ever knew. They called it a minor leg injury in the official report. The shrapnel had sliced into the muscle of my left thigh just below the femoral artery. A few centimeters higher, and I wouldn't have made it out of that valley. But I did. I walked on it for nearly 20 miles while carrying 2 soldiers who couldn't walk at all. Still, when I called home from the hospital, the first thing my father asked was, "So, will this affect your ability to stay in the army long term? I assume you've thought about next steps." Next steps. I was still learning to walk again. I remember holding the phone so tightly my fingers went numb. I told him I'd be fine, that it was just muscle damage, that I'd be back with my unit in a few weeks. He didn't ask how I felt, or whether I was scared, or if the people I saved had made it. My mother said something about sending a care package. It never came. The physical rehab was intense, but at least it made sense. Muscles follow orders. Scar tissue with enough pressure learns to stretch. Pain becomes manageable when it has a schedule. What didn't heal so easily were the nights. I started waking up gasping, reliving the moment Bennett's pulse stopped under my hands, hearing the snap of the grenade before it exploded near me. I saw Sergeant Rivera's blood soaking the sand the way Blake's chest heaved after I decompressed his lung. The way they all looked at me, not with fear, but with desperate trust. You never forget that. But I couldn't talk about any of it. The mission was still classified. Even the therapist I was assigned couldn't know the details, so I spoke in fragments. There was a crash. There were multiple wounded. I was the only medic. She nodded a lot, suggested breathing techniques. I stopped going after the 3rd session. You can't exhale something you're not allowed to say. A few months into recovery, I was granted medical leave. 30 days to rest, reconnect, reflect. So I made the mistake of going home. They greeted me like a surprise guest. My mother blinked at the sight of me on the porch. "Oh, Sarah, we weren't expecting you until tomorrow. We're hosting a little thing for Jonathan and Charlotte tonight. His engagement, remember?" "Right. The Golden Boy celebration. How could I forget?" I stood there, my uniform crisp, my purple heart centered on my chest. She glanced at it briefly, then stepped aside. "You look nice. Come in, but try not to outshine anyone, okay?" I smiled tightly. "Don't worry, I'm just the sideshow." The dinner was agonizing. Jonathan held court at the head of the table. His fiancée Charlotte was polite and clearly trying. She asked me about my service, what I actually did, whether it was hard. I barely had time to answer before my father redirected the conversation to law firms and upcoming casework. "Sarah's just doing a stint in the army," he explained, sipping wine. "Nothing as demanding as corporate litigation." Charlotte glanced at the medals on my chest. "What's that one for?" she asked, pointing to the Purple Heart. My mother rolled her eyes. "She got a little banged up during a training exercise. They hand those out like candy these days." I stared at her. "It wasn't training," I said slowly. "And the Purple Heart is awarded for wounds received in combat against enemy forces." My brother laughed light and dismissive. "Come on, Sarah. You're not storming beaches. You probably tripped over a tent peg." Something inside me cracked. The room got quiet, not from respect, but from tension, the kind they're used to navigating with passive-aggressive laughter and a second bottle of wine. I was hit by shrapnel from a grenade while treating 4 wounded soldiers under active fire. I said, my voice tight. I dragged one of them 100 feet to cover. Another one died in my arms. My father cleared his throat. "Well, if you'd gone to medical school like we suggested, you could be saving lives in a proper hospital instead of playing war hero in a desert." That word playing hung in the air like a slur. I stood up, pressing both palms to the table to keep them from shaking. "In the last 5 years," I said quietly, "I've saved more lives than I can count. I've performed procedures most doctors will never attempt, not because they're incapable, but because they'll never be forced to do them under fire in the dirt with nothing but a flashlight and instinct." I've earned the respect of people who see me as more than a disappointment. And not once, have any of you asked me what I actually do. No one spoke. Even Jonathan looked away. My mother had the decency to look uncomfortable. "We just worry," she said, "that you're wasting your potential. You had so many options." "Do you even tell people what I do?" I asked suddenly. "Do your friends know? Or do you just leave me out when you list the accomplishments of the Elwood family?" The flicker in my father's eyes told me everything. He didn't lie. He just didn't answer. I left before dessert, sat in my rental car outside the house for a full hour trying not to cry. But the tears came anyway, silent, angry, exhausted, not for the things they said, but for all the things they would never understand. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Staff Sergeant Monica Torres, the only person I trusted enough to break in front of. "You okay?" Her voice was soft. "You don't sound okay." "I'm not," I whispered. "I'm on my way. Text me the address. Don't move." 2 hours later, she found me curled up on a hotel bed, still in uniform. She didn't ask questions, just sat beside me and waited until I could speak. When I finally did, I told her everything. The mission, the screams, the silence, the way my mother had dismissed the Purple Heart like it came from a cereal box. She listened without blinking, then said the one thing I'd needed all night. "Your worth isn't determined by people who refuse to understand what you've been through. It's determined by the lives you've saved, and the soldiers who'd follow you into fire again without hesitation." I slept for 12 hours that night. When I woke up, I emailed my commanding officer, requesting reassignment. I needed distance, not just from my trauma, but from the kind of pain that didn't bleed but cut just as deep. My reassignment came quicker than I expected. Walter Reed National Military Medical Center needed experienced combat medics to support its Wounded Warrior program. The posting was technically temporary, just long enough to help with patient overflow. But for me, it was a lifeline. Walter Reed wasn't a battlefield, but it was full of warriors still fighting. Men and women with prosthetic limbs, shrapnel buried deep inside nightmares stitched into the fabric of their minds. And I understood them in a way no civilian doctor ever could, not because of training, because I'd been there too. My first patient was a former Marine who had lost both legs to an IED. His name was Captain James Rodriguez, and he didn't want my help. "They send you here to pity us," he snapped the first day. "No," I said, wheeling his IV pole closer. "They sent me because I've seen what that bomb does. I still limp when it rains." He stared at me, at the scar on my thigh. Then he nodded once. We became, not friends exactly, but something close, a kind of mutual respect forged in fire. "I don't talk to many people," he said one day during PT, "but you get it." That became a theme. The more I listened, the more they trusted me. The more I understood, the more I wanted to do. I worked late, took extra shifts, started keeping notes on what treatments helped most during rehab, what small changes eased pain or prevented setbacks. Soon I proposed a new hybrid protocol for pain management, combining physical therapy with guided breathing and trauma-informed care. It wasn't standard, it wasn't even requested, but it worked. Within 2 months, our team's recovery rates were higher than any other ward. Colonel Patricia Wright, my commanding officer, called me in for a review. "I've been watching your work, Sergeant Elwood," she said, flipping through a folder. "You're making waves." Quietly, but they're rippling. I nodded, unsure what to say. She leaned forward. "You've taken pain and turned it into process. That's not just medicine, that's leadership." It was the first time someone used that word about me without it sounding forced. Leadership. Back in Cambridge, I was the girl who didn't live up to the family name. Here I was rewriting what it meant to lead from the sidelines with compassion, not command. What I didn't know was that word of my actions had traveled further than I realized. Captain Davis, now promoted to Major, had submitted a classified after-action report about Operation Silent Retrieval, the failed mission that technically never happened. But inside that report was a detailed account of my performance, the lives I'd saved, the intelligence I'd provided, the way I held our wounded together while bleeding myself. He hadn't forgotten. Neither had the others. Torres had told everyone in her new unit about the valley, about the firefight, about what I did under fire. Word spread. whispered between teams, unofficially but insistently. The kind of whisper that travels up chains of command. 6 months after I started at Walter Reed, I got a call. Blocked number. I almost didn't answer. Sergeant Sarah Elwood said a formal voice. Please report to the office of the Secretary of the Army at Utero 900 tomorrow. Dress uniform required. I froze. Those kinds of calls don't come without reason. I barely slept that night, heart-pounding, going over every moment of the mission I couldn't talk about. Had I done something wrong? Had something leaked? I arrived at the Pentagon the next morning in full uniform. Inside a private conference room, a brigadier general waited alongside a civilian in a dark suit. Sergeant Elwood, the general, said standing. I'm General Robert Harris. This is Mr. Andrew Collins from the White House Military Office. My mouth went dry. Collins spoke next. Your actions during Operation Silent Retrieval have been reviewed at the highest levels. Due to the classified nature of the mission, public recognition was delayed. He slid a folder toward me. You are being awarded the Distinguished Service Cross for extraordinary heroism in connection with military operations against an armed hostile force. The President of the United States will present the medal next week at the White House. I stared at the citation. My hands trembled. There must be a mistake, I whispered. I was just doing my job. No mistake, General Harris said, voice firm. 15 lives were saved by your direct intervention. 27 hostages were later rescued based on intelligence you provided while wounded and under fire. I couldn't breathe. Collins leaned forward. The President personally reviewed your file. He believes your actions deserve to be known. I left the building in a daze. The sky outside was bright, the world too normal. I had walked into the Pentagon as a footnote and left as something else. That night, I stared at the invitation letter until my eyes blurred. Then I picked up my phone, typed a message to my parents. I'm receiving the Distinguished Service Cross at the White House next Thursday at 2 p.m. You're welcome to attend if you'd like. I hit send, waited. Hours passed. Finally, my mother replied. We'll check our schedules. Your father has a faculty meeting that might conflict. I laughed, out loud, bitter and breathless. A faculty meeting. The man who once told me I was throwing my life away might be busy. Eventually, they confirmed they would come. Jonathan, too. The tone of the message made it sound like they were doing me a favor. But I wasn't doing this for them. I wasn't even doing it for me. I was doing it for everyone who had ever been dismissed, overlooked, misunderstood, because their value didn't come in the package their families expected. 1 week from now, I'd stand in the East Room of the White House, not as someone's disappointment, but as someone who had saved lives when it mattered most. And maybe, just maybe, they'd see me for the first time. The day of the ceremony dawned clear and cool, the kind of Washington spring morning that felt almost too perfect to be real. I arrived early. My dress uniform was immaculate. Ribbons-aligned badges, polished boots shining like mirrors. I'd spent the night before ironing every crease into perfection, not because I needed to impress anyone, but because it was mine. My service, my story, my scars. They deserved to be honored properly. The East Room of the White House was smaller than I imagined, but grand in a quiet way. Gold drapes, crisp white columns, rows of dignitaries, military brass, and families dressed in their best. A string quartet played softly in the background. I stood in the antechamber behind the main doors, waiting with the other honorees, 2 Marines and a Navy corpsman. All of us dressed in medals we never asked for, but had earned the hard way. When the staff opened the side door and ushered our guests in, I caught a glimpse of them. My parents, my brother. All 3 sitting stiffly in the back row, surrounded by generals and cabinet members. Their designer clothes looked out of place like costumes worn by actors who'd wandered onto the wrong set. My father kept checking his watch. My mother whispered something to Jonathan, who looked honestly bored. Good, I thought. Let them feel small here. The ceremony began with military precision. A senior aide read citations for each recipient, their voices calm, precise, detached. But the words carried weight, words about courage, split-second decisions, lives saved. Then they reached my name. Sergeant Sarah Elwood distinguished herself by exceptionally valorous conduct in the face of the enemy, while serving as a combat medic with Special Operations Task Force Dagger. I stared straight ahead, hands locked at my sides. The aide continued. When her helicopter was shot down during Operation Silent Retrieval, Sergeant Elwood, despite being wounded by shrapnel, provided life-saving care to multiple casualties under direct enemy fire. Her actions directly saved the lives of 15 U.S. service members. Additionally, the intelligence she provided while under fire was instrumental in a subsequent operation that rescued 27 hostages and prevented planned terrorist attacks on U.S. soil. I didn't blink, but I heard the shift in the room, a quiet gasp, a stifled sob, chairs creaking as people leaned forward to see. I stole a glance toward the back row. My mother's hand covered her mouth. My father sat rigid expression unreadable. Jonathan stared at me like I was someone he'd never met. Then the president stood and broke protocol. He stepped away from the podium and turned toward me. The citation doesn't tell the whole story, he said, voice firm, warm. Sergeant Elwood didn't just save her team. She made possible the rescue of innocent civilians. She prevented attacks that could have taken American lives on our soil. She did all of this while wounded under fire with no guarantee of survival. Then, in a quiet moment I'll never forget, he added, "My brother was one of those hostages. My family owes you a debt we can never repay." I blinked back tears as he placed the medal around my neck and saluted. For the first time, the weight on my chest didn't feel heavy. It felt earned. The room erupted in applause. Everyone stood, except my family. They were still sitting stunned. During the reception, I was surrounded by generals, surgeons, ambassadors, reporters, even rescued aid workers. A woman with kind eyes hugged me and said, "Because of you, my daughter still has a mother." Another man shook my hand and whispered, "You're the reason I'm here. I just wanted you to know." It was overwhelming, but honest. I caught glimpses of my family standing awkwardly near the refreshment table. My father seemed visibly uncomfortable. My mother's usual social mask had cracked. Jonathan looked like someone who'd lost the thread of a conversation that had moved far beyond him. Eventually, they approached. "Sarah," my father said, his voice tentative for once. "That was quite a ceremony." "Thank you for coming," I replied, keeping my voice even. Polite, distant. "We had no idea," my mother whispered. "About any of it. You never asked," I said simply. Jonathan cleared his throat. "Those things they said, about what you did, that was all real." Before I could answer, a familiar voice joined us. "Major Davis." He stepped in a plate of reception cookies in one hand. "She was the best combat medic I've ever served with," he said without preamble. "Crawled through open ground while under fire shrapnel in her own leg to save a man who wouldn't have made it otherwise. Didn't flinch, didn't hesitate. I'd follow her anywhere." My family was silent. I turned to Davis. "Thanks, sir. I was just about to check on Captain Rodriguez. He's one of my patients at Walter Reed." "Of course," my father said quickly, his usual dismissive tone nowhere to be found. As I walked away, General Harris intercepted me. "Sergeant Elwood," he said, putting a warm hand on my shoulder, "I'd like to introduce you to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. He's heard about your work with the Wounded Warrior protocols." I nodded, following him toward a new conversation. Behind me, I could feel their eyes. For once, I didn't care what they were thinking. They were finally seeing me, but I'd already saved myself long before they did. That night, after the White House ceremony, I didn't go back to my hotel. I went to O'Malley's. It's not in any tourist guide. Just a little Irish pub tucked between two dull office buildings a few blocks from Walter Reed. Dim lights scratched tables, vinyl booths that squeaked when you leaned back too hard. But it was ours. By the time I arrived, half my old unit had already claimed the back room. Torres waved me over the second I walked in. "There she is," she shouted, raising her glass. "The one who needed a president to say what we've known for years." The room erupted in cheers and laughter. I couldn't stop smiling. Not the stiff, polite smile I gave to generals or reporters. A real one. The kind that reaches your eyes. The kind that doesn't ask for permission. "Sit down," Torres said, tugging me into a booth. "We already ordered the fries and the ugly drinks." I slid into the cracked leather seat and exhaled. For the first time all day, I could breathe. They didn't ask about the president. They didn't ask about the speech. They told stories of training days and near misses of med-tent jokes and the time I used tampons to stop a chest wound because the gauze had run out. We told her it was genius, Torres said, laughing so hard she nearly spilled her drink. She said, "Tell anyone I used a tampon as a wound plug, and I'll deny it under oath." They laughed louder. These were my people, not because we looked the same, or thought the same, but because we had bled on the same dirt. We had seen the same horrors, and somehow we were still here, still choosing life. Laughter. Each other. My phone buzzed again and again. Texts from my mother. Missed calls from my brother. A photo of the family standing stiffly in front of the White House, Jonathan's fiancée, beaming my parents both in sunglasses, faces unreadable. I set the phone face down on the table. Tonight didn't belong to them. It belonged to the people who clapped first, the people who didn't need a medal to recognize what I'd done. "Speech," someone shouted. I rolled my eyes but stood up anyway, raising my glass. "I didn't get here alone," I said. "And I didn't get here clean. You all know that. I've cried in supply closets. I've cursed every sunrise. But I've also watched miracles happen on dirt floors with broken supplies. I've seen people refuse to die just because someone stayed beside them." I paused, throat tight. "You stayed beside me, and that matters more than any medal ever will." They raised their glasses in return. To Elwood, Torres said, "The one who bled, led, and still picked up our bar tabs." Laughter. More drinks. Fries drenched in vinegar. It was perfect. When I finally got back to my room past midnight, the silence felt kind instead of cold. I took off my uniform slowly, carefully folding it as if it still held heat from the day. The Distinguished Service Cross lay in its case on the nightstand, catching the lamplight like a slow-burning ember. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. What I'd done, what we'd done, was already woven into every part of me. In the morning, I opened my phone. A news article headlined, "President awards Distinguished Service Cross to Army medic who saved 15 under fire." Beneath it, a photo me standing at attention, the president beside me. My family blurred in the background, looking stunned. The caption read, "Family of DSC Recipient Witnesses Ceremony." Witnesses, not authors, not heroes, just watching. I sat with that for a long moment. That's all they'd ever done, really. Watched. Watched me stumble. Watched me leave. Watched me become something they couldn't define. And now watched me be recognized by a world they no longer understood. But something had shifted in their eyes. Not love, not yet. But maybe realization. Later that week, my father emailed me. It wasn't long, just a subject line today. Inside was one sentence. "I've been in academia for 40 years and never earned the kind of respect I saw you receive yesterday." I didn't know what to say to that, so I said nothing. That night, Torres called. "Your mom just shared the White House photo on Facebook," she said, laughing. Caption, "So proud of our daughter's service." She spelled medic wrong. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Maybe both. "I don't need them to catch up," I said. "But I'm not letting them rewrite the beginning of this story either." Torres was quiet for a second. "Damn right," she said. Then she added softer, "But maybe, just maybe, they're finally learning how to read it." The next week, I was invited to speak at a military medical symposium. Not just about field trauma, but about what comes after. About ghosts and scars and what we owe the ones we patch up and send back into a world that doesn't understand them. I spoke plainly, honestly, and after a young medic approached me, she looked barely 20. "Sergeant Elwood," she said, eyes wide, "I joined because of your story. I saw the article. I thought, if she can do that, maybe I can too." I didn't know what to say, so I reached into my pocket and pulled out the combat medic badge I wore under my dress coat. "You'll earn one of your own," I said, pressing it into her palm. "But until then, carry this like you mean it." She nodded, blinking fast. Later that night, alone in my room, I stood in front of the mirror. I didn't see a disappointment. I didn't see a hero. I saw a woman who had walked through fire holding the hands of the wounded and come out whole, maybe not because of her family, but in spite of them. 3 weeks after the ceremony, my father showed up at my apartment in San Antonio. No email, no phone call, just appeared. Wearing a worn cardigan I'd never seen before and holding a manila folder like it was a passport into a world he'd refused to enter. "I had meetings at UT," he said, as if that explained anything. "Figured I'd stop by if you're free." I should have said no. I should have reminded him of every time I'd stood on a tarmac alone, every unopened letter, every laugh behind my back. But instead, I opened the door. He stood in the entryway, awkwardly, eyes scanning my tiny apartment, the boots lined by the door, the folded uniform stacked on a bookshelf, the Purple Heart in a shadow box above my desk. He didn't comment, he just said, "Would you show me around the base if that's something you're allowed to do?" I stared at him for a long second, then nodded. I didn't do it for him. I did it because something inside me had shifted too. I was no longer the girl who needed his approval like oxygen, so I brought him to Walter Reed, introduced him to nurses' fellow medics, even a few patients' veterans with scars far deeper than mine. I showed him how we adapted therapy techniques for those with traumatic brain injuries, demonstrated how combat medics now train with AI-assisted simulation units. He watched quietly, hands clasped behind his back. When a senior officer passed by and saluted me, my father's eyes followed him with something like confusion or awe. "Do they always treat you like that?" he asked. "Like what? Like you matter more than the title on your business card?" I didn't answer. That night over dinner, he finally said it. "I've been arrogant for most of your life." He paused. "I measured success by citations tenure, by academic awards pinned on walls. And I didn't see what you were building because it didn't fit inside my world." He looked down at his hands. "Turns out your world was bigger." I didn't cry. I just listened, because that was the thing I'd always wanted from him. And now, maybe he was starting to learn it. My mother's change came slower. She sent awkward texts for a few weeks, recipes I didn't ask for, articles about women in the military like I'd never heard of them. Once she texted, "Did you ever watch Grey's Anatomy?" as if we were starting from some clean slate where our wounds weren't still healing beneath the surface. Then one day a box arrived at my door. No return address, just my name. Inside was a photo of my grandfather in uniform, one I'd never seen. He was young eyes, dark jaw tight. Next to it were his old medals, still in their original case. No note, no explanation, just history finally placed in my hands. I called her. "You never had these out in the house," I said. "I kept them in a drawer," she admitted. "It was easier." "Why now?" A pause. "Because your grandfather would have wanted you to have them," she said. "And because I think I should have given them to you a long time ago." It wasn't forgiveness, but it was an offering. And sometimes that's how healing begins, not in grand gestures, but in the quiet return of what was withheld. The most surprising change, though, came from Jonathan. He started volunteering with a veterans legal aid organization offering pro bono services to help former service members with disability claims and housing issues. I didn't even know until Torres forwarded me a link to an article he was quoted in. When I called, he sounded different. Tired but grounded. "I had no idea how many of you come home and get buried in paperwork and red tape," he said. "I've been helping this guy, Marine PTSD, got denied benefits 3 times. And he still thanked me for just listening." "That's how it starts," I said. "Listening." There was a pause. "Do you hate me?" he asked suddenly. "No," I said honestly, "but I don't trust you yet." He didn't argue, didn't defend himself. He just said fair. We kept talking, slowly, carefully, about everything we'd never said at the dinner table. Later that year, I agreed to attend a family therapy session during a visit home. We sat in a sterile office with a young therapist who had the calm voice of someone who'd seen 100 family wars and knew not to flinch at any grenade. My mother was the first to speak. "I was terrified the moment you enlisted," she said. "I imagined losing you every day, and I didn't know how to hold that fear. So I pretended your job wasn't dangerous." She wiped at her eyes. "That wasn't fair, to you," my father added quietly. My own father came back from Korea. Different. I watched him carry pain in his silence. "I didn't want that for you, so I dismissed it. Like if I refused to see it, it wouldn't exist." I looked at both of them. "You couldn't protect me," I said, "but you could have supported me, and you chose not to." They nodded, not in defense but in acceptance. It wasn't a perfect session. There were tears, long silences, some truths that stung more than bullets ever could. But when we left, something had changed. We were no longer pretending to be a family. We were learning how to actually become one. The road was long, still is, But at least now we were walking it together. And this time, I wasn't limping alone. It was Thanksgiving. My first one home in years. The table looked exactly as I remembered, perfectly folded napkins, heirloom china, and food laid out like a magazine spread. But something had shifted in the air. It wasn't just the polite silence, or the way my mother smiled at me a little too long. It was the space. For once, they had made room for me. At the head of the table, between my father's degree from Harvard and Jonathan's bar license, hung a new edition, a shadow box containing my distinguished service, cross my Purple Heart, and a single black and white photo of me in uniform. No one mentioned it. They didn't have to. After dinner, while everyone moved to the living room for pie and politics, my father lingered in the study, searching through the tall bookcases that lined the walls. I followed, half out of habit, half out of curiosity. He opened the bottom drawer of an old oak filing cabinet and pulled out a magazine yellowed folded down the middle. 1972, he said, handing it to me. I haven't looked at this in decades. It was an army recruitment brochure, the kind with slogans like "Be all you can be" and pictures of young men standing proud in desert camouflage. I blinked, confused. You considered enlisting? I asked. He gave a soft laugh, more breath than sound. I more than considered it. I passed the physical, filled out the paperwork, was days away from shipping out. Why didn't you? He leaned against the bookshelf, arms crossed, eyes distant. Your grandfather. I raised my eyebrows. The same grandfather who inspired me to serve. He saw what war did to men, not just their bodies but their minds. He told me, no more Mitchells coming home shattered. He practically begged me to apply to college instead. I sat down slowly, magazine still in my hands. I had no idea. I didn't want to admit it, he said. That I'd once wanted what you chose. That I'd given it up so easily. He sighed. I think I was hard on you because you had the courage to follow a path I abandoned. We sat in silence for a long time. No speeches, no tears. Just two people finally meeting in the middle. Later that evening, I found my mother alone in the kitchen, washing dishes by hand, even though she had a state-of-the-art dishwasher humming behind her. I saw what he showed you, she said, not turning around. I didn't know, I replied. I thought he hated the military. He didn't, she said. He hated what it took from people. But now I think he just didn't understand that for some of us it gives more than it takes. She finally turned to me, drying her hands on a dish towel. Your grandfather would have been so proud of you, she said softly. I should have told you that sooner. I looked at her. Not the woman who used to dismiss my medals as trinkets, but the one who now displayed them next to wedding photos and law degrees. I don't need you to be proud, I said gently, but I need you to stop pretending I'm not yours. She nodded. That night, I sat in the room that had once been mine. It looked the same, except now above the desk hung a second shadow box. Inside were my grandfather's medals, his faded photo and a typed letter. A note was taped to the glass. I kept them hidden. I thought they'd protect you. I was wrong. They should have prepared you. Mom. I sat there for a long time, not crying, just breathing, and realizing something I'd never fully understood until now. My family didn't suddenly become good at love, but they were learning to show it. And sometimes that was enough. 2 weeks later, Jonathan invited me to speak at a Veterans Legal Aid fundraiser he was co-hosting in D.C. I won't ask you to perform, he said quickly. Just be there. They need to see someone who made it through the fog. I agreed. That night, as I watched him shake hands with soldiers and quietly answer their questions about benefits, I saw something I hadn't before. Humility. He wasn't playing hero. He was finally following. After the event, he walked beside me to the parking lot. You still don't trust me, he said. No, I answered. But I'm starting to believe I might want to. He didn't push, didn't ask for a shortcut. He just nodded and opened my car door. Back at Walter Reed, life settled into a quiet rhythm again. I kept working with the Wounded Warrior program, refined the protocols, helped more soldiers find footing when the ground beneath them still trembled. One day during a group session, a new patient, a young woman barely 23, raised her hand. I don't know who I am without my platoon, she said. They saw me. My family never has. The others nodded in understanding. I leaned forward. You don't need them to see you to be real, I said. You already are. They'll catch up or they won't. But your worth, that's already settled. She blinked, holding back tears. I understood, because once I was her, and now I wasn't anymore. Because sometimes the best thing your family can give you isn't approval, it's silence and the space to become someone new. That Thanksgiving something happened I never imagined. My family invited my team, not metaphorically, literally. My mother called me in October, early nervous. We'd like to host Thanksgiving, she said, and we'd love it if some of your friends joined us. I waited, half expecting the caveat, the but that usually came next. It didn't. They're not just friends, I said. They're family. I know, she replied. That's why we want them here. And so, on a crisp November afternoon, Sergeant Monica Torres, Captain Rodriguez, and 2 other wounded warrior patients walked up the steps of my parents' front porch in Cambridge, dressed in jeans jackets and their best meet-the-family expressions. My mother opened the door with a nervous smile and a white linen apron tied over her usual cream sweater. My father stood behind her in a sweater vest and slacks, holding a tray of wine glasses, like a man trying not to drop a grenade. The introductions were awkward but sincere. My parents tried. They asked about deployments, about therapy, about physical pain and emotional recovery. Sometimes the questions were clumsy, sometimes too careful. But they asked, and they listened. Captain Rodriguez, who months earlier wouldn't speak to anyone without a badge or a uniform, told my father about losing both legs in an explosion outside Kandahar. It took me longer to learn how to sit still than how to walk again, he said. Turns out the mind's recovery is the real war. My father nodded. I wouldn't know, he admitted. But I believe you. It was the most honest thing I'd ever heard him say. Over dinner, I noticed something else. In the living room, the mantel no longer displayed just Jonathan's degrees and my parents' awards. There was a new section carefully arranged. My medals. A frame letter from the president. A photo of my team standing together in front of a dusty tent in Afghanistan. Right next to it, my grandfather's uniform cap resting beneath a folded flag. My mother caught me looking. I found the cap in a box in the attic, she said. It belonged to him, but I think he'd want it here now. I didn't speak. I just reached for her hand. And for once, she didn't flinch. After the pie was served and the guests began loosening their belts, Torres and I stepped outside for air. We stood on the front steps, shoulders touching. You think they mean it, she asked. I think they're trying, I said. And I think this time they're not trying to erase who I am in the process. She nodded, exhaling a plume of breath into the cold. Inside, through the window, we could see Captain Rodriguez laughing at something Jonathan said. My mother pouring tea. My father looking peaceful. Not proud. Not performative. Just present. And maybe that was enough. Later that night, I walked into my old bedroom, now half storage, half shrine. The walls were still the same pale yellow. The desk still held my childhood lamp and a stack of dusty anatomy books from when my mother had insisted I'd be a doctor. But now above the desk hung a new photo collage. Me in uniform, my team in the field, graduation from AIT, a grainy still from the White House ceremony. In the center was a quote in calligraphy. Purpose isn't found in approval. It's found in what you do when no one is watching. I sat down on the bed and stared at it. They hadn't erased the past. They'd rewritten the frame. And in doing so, they'd finally made space for the daughter they actually had, not the one they kept waiting for. Weeks later, my father attended one of my training sessions at Walter Reed. He watched from the back of the room as I led a simulation on combat triage, his face unreadable. Afterward, as I debriefed with my trainees, he walked up and said, "You command the room." "Habit," I said. "No," he replied, "earned." He paused. "Watching you work, I finally understood something. The world I built my life in has rules and titles and boundaries, but yours, it has courage. And I think that scared me, because I didn't know how to exist in it. I didn't reply right away. Then I said, "You don't have to exist in it. You just have to respect that I do." He nodded. "I'm trying." That evening, he sent me a photo. It was a page from his old journal, handwritten, dated 1972. It read, "I still want to serve, but I'm afraid it'll make me someone my father won't recognize." Beneath it, he had scribbled a new line. "She became someone I'm finally learning how to recognize." Healing wasn't linear. Some weeks, my mother still sent weird articles about female soldiers and PTSD, like she was Googling her way to redemption. Jonathan still interrupted me with lawyer jokes that made Torres roll her eyes. But they were trying, and more importantly, they weren't trying to take credit. They were finally just showing up. That Thanksgiving was the first time I sat at a table with both of my families, military and biological, and didn't feel like I had to translate myself to be understood. They didn't get everything, but they saw me, fully, finally. And this time the seat at the table, it was mine. 6 months after that Thanksgiving, I was invited to teach full-time at the Army Medical Department Center in San Antonio. It wasn't glamorous. No podium, no cameras, no polished speeches or ribbon-cutting ceremonies. Just a classroom full of young recruits, their boots too clean, their backs too straight. Some were nervous, others cocky. A few had already seen more than anyone their age should, and all of them reminded me of myself. The girl who walked into basic training with trembling hands and too many voices in her head telling her she wasn't enough. I never told them everything. The classified mission, the valley, the medal. Instead, I taught them how to find a vein in low light, how to pack a chest wound with gauze and not panic, how to talk to a dying soldier like it wasn't goodbye. But sometimes in the quiet after class, one would stay behind. Like Private Davis, barely 21, tough exterior eyes, too tired. "Sergeant Elwood," he said one afternoon, hesitating. "I read about you. Online. The medal. The mission." I didn't answer. I waited. "I joined because of you," he continued. "I didn't know people like you existed. I wanted to make that kind of difference." I looked at him, not the story in his head, but the uncertainty in his eyes. "The medals don't make the medic," I told him. "It's the willingness to run toward the wounded when everyone else is running away. It's doing your job even when no one's watching." He nodded like he understood, or wanted to, and I realized then I had become the person I used to look for in every room. Not perfect, not invincible, but steady, seen. And not because of the medal on my chest, but because of the lives I had chosen to stand beside. At home, things continued to shift. Not dramatically, just truthfully. My father started attending military medicine conferences sometimes as a guest speaker, sometimes just to listen. He sent me articles now too, not as a substitute for presence, but as an attempt to engage. "Did you see this study on battlefield transfusion protocols?" he asked during a call. "I contributed to it," I replied. He went quiet, then said, "Of course you did." My mother stopped asking about promotions. She asked about people. "How's Monica? Did that Marine you mentioned finish rehab? Are you still mentoring that young woman from Oregon?" I answered, not because I owed her explanations, but because she was finally asking to know me, not fix me. And Jonathan, he still made dumb jokes, still called my boots combat Crocs. But once during a family dinner, when someone scoffed at how easy the military has it these days, he cut them off. "You think it's easy," he said, voice sharp. "My sister bled out in a mountain valley while saving men who'd been shot. She limped 20 miles with shrapnel in her leg. You want to say that to her face?" No one did. And Jonathan, he didn't even look at me when he said it. He didn't need to. He wasn't performing. He was protecting. That mattered more than any apology. One afternoon, I visited my parents' house alone. No occasion, just a quiet Sunday. My mother was in the garden, my father reading by the window. I walked into the study, expecting to grab an old book I'd left years ago. Instead, I found something else. On the desk, framed neatly in glass, was the letter I'd written to myself before that second deployment, the one I left in my locker, in case I didn't come home. I'd never shown it to them, but Torres had found it after the ceremony, folded between pages of my notebook. She must have sent it. "You chose this life for a reason," the letter read. "Whatever happens, remember your worth isn't measured by their understanding. It never was." I stood there for a long time, because now I believed that, deep in my bones. I used to think recognition was the goal, that if I worked hard enough, proved myself enough, saved enough lives, someone, especially them, would finally say, "You matter." But the truth, recognition is nice. It heals some wounds. But it's not what saves you. What saves you is knowing who you are before anyone else does. What saves you is running toward the fire anyway, holding the line when everything inside you is breaking, refusing to disappear just because someone refuses to see you. That's what saved me. Not the president, not the medal, Not even the family who learned too late how to love me right. It was the mission, the purpose, the truth I carved out of silence and smoke, that I was never just passing through this world hoping to be claimed. I had always belonged to the fight, to the healing, to myself, and now standing here, no longer waiting to be introduced or defended or accepted. I finally saw myself clearly too.